Do you want these sides to play in this tournament that generates revenue for the EFL? Because a lot of them don't want to. So if you do, you're going to have to find some form of compromise that you might not like, or the alternative is they turn around and say they're not going to play. If these guys don't want to play in this League Cup tournament, what will happen to it?
I'm looking at the Carabao Cup draw, Simon, for the next stages of Manchester United against Barnsley, Chelsea against Barrow, Arsenal against Bolton Wanderers. Seeding in the Cup, does it kill the integrity of this competition? A new seeding mechanism has been introduced. Now, you probably heard a bit about this in breakfast, but we're going to get into this right now. A new seeding mechanism has been introduced to the competition for the third round draw. Now, basically, because the Champions League is expanding, there's now a clash in the calendar for when traditionally the League Cup third round matches would be played. So to avoid fixture clashes and to ease congestion, teams playing in Europe in the Champions League have been kept apart to allow them to fulfil both their Champions League and their Carabao Cup commitments across a 2-week period. So in other words, what's going on here? The big guns are having their European commitments prioritised over what is the domestic cup.
That's the benefit. That's the benefit of merit, isn't it?
No, but let's call it for what it is. The draw has been tampered with here in favour of the bigger teams, in favour of the elite. Where is the spirit of competition domestically with this?
Well, first and foremost, you could say that coming in the third round of the FA Cup has a skewed perspective, doesn't it? Because the bigger sides, all the bigger sides, coming in the third round. Second of all, which do you want? The EFL didn't have to accept this. It's their
no
cup.
Choice. They didn't have a choice.
No, it is their choice. They could have pushed back and made it a public domain issue and had a song and dance about it.
No, UEFA are saying, we want to make more money out the Champions League.
You're missing my point.
So to do this...
I get it, but that's not UEFA's gift to superimpose over what happens in a domestic league. UEFA can expand their tournaments as much as they want. How the league then finds its way through accommodating those extra fixtures is up to the league scheduling. Now, if the EFL felt that strongly about it, there's this argument. What UEFA actually wants is the second cup removed. Right? You've seen it happen in Spain, you've seen it happen in Italy, and what you've got in the UK is a resistance because we feel there's a fundamental value in having this tournament that was created in the 60s, that has great legacy attached to it, was originally created to be able to compensate, what for? For the bigger teams being kicked out of the FA Cup early by losing games. So it was always staggered around giving the bigger sides a better opportunity to win a cup, because ultimately that's what the League Cup was created for. And now what you've got is the lesser of two evils. Do you want these sides to play in this tournament that generates revenue for the EFL? Because a lot of them don't want to. So if you do, you're going to have to find some form of compromise that you might not like, you might not think in an ideal world is a perfect representation of the perfect world of football balance, or the alternative is they turn around and say they're not going to play.
Well, 1 minute you say the EFL didn't need to do this, and now you're saying they need to compromise.
No, I'm saying that the commercial reality of it is that they have an alternative, which is to push back and say, no, we're not doing it. And then as a result of
where would that get them?
Well, it depends how brave they feel they have to be. It depends how fertile the battleground is for them to drag the Premier League kicking and screaming into an argument in the public domain about how they rule English football. Given the fact that independent regulators coming down the line saying, this is what we mean. This is the weighting of football. This is the unfairness of it. A valuable competition that's been historically very meaningful to this country has been diminished and demeaned by the greed and avarice of Premier League football clubs, and play that out in the public domain. They chose not to do that. What they chose to do was find a commercial solution in the big grown-up world of how people find compromises. So all those people that are sitting there going, it's awful, it's outrageous, it's unfortunate. Well, okay, so is the Premier League to some extent, and so is the distribution of wealth in football to some extent.
But in this instance, so commercial solutions trump integrity, don't they?
Sorry, are you bringing integrity into the conversation when it comes to football?
Yes, because this draw has been tampered with. So no, that's exactly what's happening here. Commercial solutions have trumped integrity.
No, it's just evolved. Everything's seeded. So when you've got a Wimbledon number one...
seeded.
Okay, so why does the number one player in Wimbledon get seeded to avoid the number two player?
No, I don't think it should be.
But that's how sport is, because ultimately sport is about getting the best, ideally, to get to the finals.
The Carabao Cup here has had to bow to UEFA because they want to expand the Champions League. Whatever the UEFA do with the Champions League should have nothing to do with the Carabao Cup.
But they haven't bowed to UEFA. They've bowed to the lobby inside the Premier League that's acquiesced to UEFA. And the reasons why the Premier League...
And who are they, the Big Six?
Well, whoever the Big Six may be at that time.
Right, but that's wrong, surely,
But a year
ago,
it wouldn't have been Aston Villa considered the Big Six.
But isn't that wrong?
I think it's the reality. Why is it wrong? It's the reality of what happens. Football is now as much about money as it is about the competitive of the sport. And everyone that thinks it isn't is silly, because it is. So the bottom line is we've now got... Have you thought perhaps that it might be easier with the distributions if the big six get what they want? The next time you go on their door for more distribution down to the pyramid, which they don't have to do...
And they're not doing...
Well, you wouldn't do it either. If someone came along to you and said, voluntarily give that money to that radio presenter over there because he's getting less than you, you'd say, sod off, until you were made to do so. Right? In this instance, the Premier League clubs will be made to do, but you're getting more and more leverage. There's more and more concessions being made. In exchange for those concessions, there has to be something back. The first thing that comes back is their participation in a competition that they don't want to be in the first place. The second thing that comes back is a loading of your gun with a metaphorical bullet to turn around and say, we've made concessions, you better start distributing fairly now, because you're getting more money as a result of your participation in the UEFA competition, which we get zero benefit from.
I get all that, but do you accept, Simon, politics, that the spirit of competition is impacted by this?
Okay, England gets seeded.
Yes or no?
Well, no, because England gets seeded in a World Cup, and because they've done well in qualifying groups and meaningless friendlies, they get seeded to avoid teams.
So for the first time, because UEFA want to expand their Champions League, the Carabao Cup is affected, and the draw is tampered with.
But the Carabao Cup can
because they're keeping Champions League teams, English Champions League teams, apart in a totally different competition.
And that is a totally valid argument. And the only alternative I'd give to it is don't have them then. And then have no competition, because the revenues that will be generated will be zip. And the reasons why they're making this compromise is because it's a lesser of two evils. Do I think it's wonderful? No. Then why aren't the big clubs coming in on the first round of the FA Cup? Why doesn't that happen? When did that get decided as fair and representative?
Oh, that's because
that's fine.
The big clubs are telling the smaller clubs, you are nothing without us. You need us. You need us.
No, this competition does.
Acquiesce to us.
This competition does. This competition does. And this competition is entirely predicated upon the value of the big clubs being in it.
So is this the first nail in the coffin then of the Carabao Cup? This is the start, isn't it? UEFA are tampering with it.
Okay. So when Man United decided...
Incidentally, just in the passing, why can't a Champions League team play a Champions League team?
In what respects?
Well, and because of all of this, a Champions League team, an English team, playing a Europa League team, an English team, would be a problem. I get that in terms of fixture congestion.
Commercial value.
But
commercial value. In the same way, why can't a top side in Europe play a top side in Europe or the world in the World Cup? And why are they seeded in such a way to potentially avoid one another to the business end of the tournament?
Is this right? Is what we're seeing today, this Carabao Cup draw, and the way it's fashioned, the way it's been brought about this time around for the third round, is it right that it's done in this way?
Is it right compared to what's been done before? Is it right?
But it favours the big guns. Well, I mean, what will they tamper with next?
Is it right in comparison with what we've done before? If we started the conversation today, right, and the League Cup didn't exist, and the League Cup now was brought onto the roster and ultimately suggested that the top six clubs are not going to be put into a certain mix, people would accept it as the principle of a new tournament, because it's steeped in some sort of legacy history, which is being disbanded left, right and centre. Everything that we ever knew about football has been restructured, from how many points you get to a game, to how a game is officiated, to which teams play in the Champions League, which, by the way, is 90% of the teams in the Champions League aren't even bleeding champions. So we can look at the whole thing and say, well, it's all rooted in hypocrisy and double standards and all centred in one thing. The only reason the EFL Cup exists now, in its entirety, is for one reason and one reason only: the commercial revenue it brings to the Football League. Because every other league in Europe is being positively encouraged to step their second cup down. And the resistance from the UK is, no, actually, we attach value to it. And if that's the lesser of two evils, that we maintain this valuable cup by finding something that gives an acquiescence to the big six, whoever they may be at the time, then I'll live with it. If others don't want to, then campaign for the cup to be no more.
There's Dan in the Whirl. I think you've nailed it, Dan. Good morning. Supporters outside the top six are completely fed up with the top flight football these days. This is another example of keeping the top clubs at the top because they make the most money. along with
and
PSR, and the top 6 getting fined pittances for trying to break away into a Super League.
And I agree with that. I agree with the principle that once upon a time I agreed with PRS and I agreed with financial fair play because I thought what it would do is reduce hyperinflation, stop having to listen to burbling rubbish on transfer deadline day about how much money people have wasted, and put some order into football. But it didn't. What it did was it created a trapdoor effect, i.e. everyone else was locked out.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. But in a real world where we all have to live, if these guys don't want to play in this League Cup tournament, what will happen to it? We both know what will happen to it. It'll lose its commercial value. What is the lesser of two evils?
UEFA tampering with it.
You're making it about UEFA.
That's what it is.
It's about
it is about them.
It's about the Premier League's...
They've railroaded it through.
If the Premier League and the other leagues didn't want to increase the UEFA tournament, then they wouldn't have done, would they?
So money talks. I mean, that is natural
no,
evolution,
we all go to work
as you
for
would
charity.
say. It's natural evolution, as you would say. Seeding in the cup, then, does it kill the integrity of the competition? Is this the first sign so that the big boys who are in the Champions League can't draw each other in a totally different tournament, the Carabao Cup? So Europe is having the priority over a domestic competition. Where will it end? Is this the first sign of Europe being prioritised over domestic cups?